The ground here gives a little underfoot, soft and pale, and if you scuff it with your boot, you find clean yellow sand just beneath the pine needles. That is the first surprise of this walk. You are in central Minnesota, a land people picture as lakes and dark woods, and yet you are standing on a dune. Today we are walking through Sand Dunes State Forest, near the small town of Zimmerman, where straight ranks of planted pine rise out of drifting sand. It is a landscape that was almost lost, then deliberately rebuilt, tree by human hands. Sand Dunes State Forest sits in Sherburne County, about 45 miles northwest of the Twin Cities, in the wide sandy country along the Mississippi River. This whole region has a name that tells you what to expect underfoot. Geographers call it the Anoka Sand Plain, a broad, low, gently rolling sheet of sand that stretches across several counties of central Minnesota. Into that plain, the state carved out this forest, and near its heart lies a protected jewel called the Uncas Dunes. Our route wanders the forest trails and then swings east toward a rise the locals call Blue Hill. Listen for a moment, and you notice how quiet the pine plantation is. The needles overhead soften every sound, and the fallen ones build a thick brown mat that muffles your footsteps. Not much grows in the deep shade below these dense rows, which is exactly what the planters intended when they set them out. These trees were not here a lifetime ago. They were planted on purpose, in straight lines, to do a very specific job on a piece of ground that had become almost unusable. To understand why, you have to go back to the 1930s. The sandy soils of this plain were always thin and hungry, and when settlers cleared and plowed them, the light grip that native plants had kept on the sand let go. Then came the great drought years, the same dry decade that turned the southern plains into the Dust Bowl. Here the loose sand lifted on the wind, drifted like snow, buried fence lines, and crept over abandoned fields. Farms failed, families left, and the county was left with acres of shifting, blowing ground that would grow almost nothing. The land you are walking now is the answer that people gave to that crisis. Rather than let the sand keep moving, the state stepped in to hold it down and heal it. The tool they chose was the tree, and the strategy was patient and simple. Cover the bare sand with deep-rooted conifers, let the roots knit the ground together, and let the falling needles slowly build a soil that had never really existed here before. Every straight row around you is a small act of repair. In 1943, the Minnesota legislature formally established Sand Dunes State Forest to carry out that work. Over the following years, crews and volunteers came out with bundles of seedlings and pushed them into the sand one by one, thousands upon thousands of them. It is slow, back-bending labor, a person moving down a line with a planting bar, opening a slit, tucking in a tiny tree, and stepping on to close it. What had been called wasteland was turned, seedling by seedling, into a forest. The trees around you are the grown result of that stubborn effort. You can read the planting and the geometry of the woods. Look down any row and the trunks line up like posts, spaced with an even, deliberate rhythm no natural forest would ever show. Foresters call these stands plantations, and Sand Dunes holds roughly 2,700 acres of them. Among the pines they favored was the red pine, Minnesota's state tree, a species well suited to poor, dry, sandy ground. Its thick, reddish, plated bark and tall, straight trunk are easy to pick out once you know to look. The red pine earned its place here for good reasons. It tolerates the droughty sand, it grows straight and tall, and its deep roots help anchor loose ground. In cross-section, its bark breaks into broad flakes the color of dried blood, which is where the tree gets its name. A mature red pine can live for 2 or 3 centuries and reach well over 100 feet, its bare trunk lifting a crown of long paired needles into the light. Walking beneath them, you are moving through trees planted with the expectation that they would outlast the people who set them. Every so often the trail opens onto a bare patch where the pale sand shows through the needles, and you are reminded what all of this is standing on. Reach down and the grains run cool and clean between your fingers, almost like beach sand. That is no accident of comparison. This sand really did come to rest at the edge of water, long ago, and the story of how it got here begins with a wall of ice. At the close of the last ice age, more than 10,000 years ago, a great glacier lay across this part of Minnesota. As it melted, torrents of meltwater poured off the ice, heavy with sand and gravel ground from the rock beneath. Those rivers spread their load across a broad, flat basin, sorting it as they went and leaving the heavier sand behind. Much of the Uncas sand plain was laid down in this way, along the valley of the ancient Mississippi. Some of it, geologists now think, settled in the still water of a shallow glacial lake rather than a running river. Picture that scene as the ice pulled back, a wide, level plain of wet sand, dotted with pools where blocks of buried ice slowly melted out. Where those ice blocks sat, the ground later slumped into rounded hollows, and many of them filled with water to become the kettle lakes and ponds scattered across this country today. The land you are walking is the dried floor of that meltwater world, remarkably flat, remarkably sandy, and everywhere shaped by vanished ice. Almost all of the soil here drains fast and holds little water, which is why so little farming ever truly took hold. The ice left the sand, but the wind gave it these shapes. After the glacier was gone, long dry spells swept across the bare plain before plants could fully cover it. Steady winds picked up the loose grains and piled them into low dunes, ridges, and hummocks, the same kind of drifting that farmers would battle again thousands of years later. Where the land looks gently rolling around you, you are often reading old dunes, softened now under grass and trees. This is one of the very few places in Minnesota where you can walk over genuine sand dunes far from any shore. Seen from the air, the pattern of this place comes clear. Dark green blocks of planted pine sit like tiles across the land, edged by paler openings of grass and oak. Between them, you can trace the soft swells of the dunes and the round eyes of the kettle ponds. It is a mosaic of the wild and the made, the drifting dune and the ruler straight plantation lying side by side. From up here, you understand that this forest is really a patchwork, part restored wilderness and part living experiment in holding sand in place. Now the trees thin, the light floods in, and the trail carries you out of the shadowed plantation into open, sunlit ground. This is a different world entirely, warm and buzzing, with grasses waist-high and scattered oaks standing alone against the sky. Before the pines, before the plow, much of this sand plain looked like this. Not deep forest and not true prairie, but something in between, a landscape ecologists call Oak Savanna. Oak savanna is one of the rarest habitats in the whole Midwest, and the Uncas sand plain holds some of its finest remnants. Picture widely spaced bur oak and northern pin oak, tough, gnarled trees with room to spread, standing over a sunlit floor of prairie grasses and wildflowers. The trees are scattered rather than closed, so light reaches the ground and a rich carpet of plants can thrive between them. For thousands of years, frequent fires kept it this way, burning back the brush and young trees while the deep-rooted grasses and thick-barked oaks survived. Take away the fire, and the savanna slowly closes into ordinary woods. Out here, the ground shows its true nature again, sandy and quick to dry, hot under the afternoon sun. The plants that grow well in it are survivors, deep-rooted and drought-hardy, built to hold on where water drains away in hours. Among these grasses and flowers lived a small creature that gave this place one of its names, a butterfly you would have to be quick to catch even a glimpse of. Look closely at the low tufts among the taller stems, and you may find hairy grama, a modest prairie grass whose seed head curls to one side like a tiny comb or a small brown flag. It is easy to overlook, but on these dry dunes it was quietly essential. Hairy grama and its relatives are among the few grasses that flourish in this hot, starved sand. And for one particular insect, this unassuming plant was everything, the single food on which its young depended. That insect is the Uncas Skipper, a small, fast butterfly that gives the Uncas dunes their name. Skippers are stout, quick flyers, and this one has been described as shaped a little like a fighter jet, darting low over the grass in sudden bursts. Its caterpillars fed on the grama grass rooted in these dunes, so the butterfly could live only where that grass and this open sand came together. In Minnesota, it was known from just a couple of spots on the Uncas sand plain, recorded from the 1960s into the late 1980s. Since then, it has not been reported in the state at all, and it may be gone from Minnesota entirely. It is a sobering thing to walk ground named for a creature that no longer seems to be here. The skipper's story is a small, sharp lesson in how tightly living things can be bound to a single place and a single plant. When the open, fire-kept, grassy dunes shrank, the butterfly that needed them had nowhere else to go. That is a large part of why this particular corner of the forest is now specially protected, so that whatever still depends on these dunes has a chance to hold on. In the warm months, this dry ground puts on a quiet, surprising show. Hairy Pucoon opens clusters of bright orange-yellow trumpets low against the sand, and golden aster scatters its small, sunny blooms across the openings. Silky prairie clover raises slender rose-purple spikes, and here and there the sprawling mats of creeping juniper hug the ground with their blue-green needles. These are specialists, plants that ask for exactly what this place offers: full sun, fast-draining sand, and open room. Together they turn what looks like barren waste into one of the most distinctive gardens in the state. The finest of these openings has been set aside as the Uncas Dunes Scientific and Natural Area, a place kept deliberately wild for study and safekeeping. Its core is a dry, barren oak savanna of a couple hundred acres, exactly the widely spaced oaks and prairie floor we have been walking past. Land like this is protected not for playgrounds or picnic tables, but for the rare community of living things it shelters. As you walk its edge, you are passing one of the last honest fragments of what this whole plain once looked like. The name Uncas reaches back well beyond this butterfly or these dunes. It was the name of a 17th century Mohegan leader in far-off Connecticut, made famous in the 1820s by James Fenimore Cooper's novel The Last of the Mohicans. In the following century, a naturalist borrowed that literary name for the small skipper we met earlier, and from the butterfly it passed, in turn, to these Minnesota dunes. So a word carried from the eastern seaboard, through a popular novel and onto an insect, ended up marking a patch of sand in Sherburne County. Names, like sand, drift a long way before they finally settle. The path leads on, dipping into a low hollow and rising again over a gentle swell of old dune. In places, the ground folds into rounded basins, some dry and grassy, others cradling a glint of water. These are the kettles, the melt scars of that buried glacial ice, and they add pools and wetland edges to a landscape you might expect to be nothing but dry sand. It is this mix, high dry dune beside low wet hollow, that lets so many different plants and animals share one small forest. Where the land dips low enough to meet the water table, the forest hides quiet ponds and lakes ringed with cattail and sedge. Sand Dunes has a handful of these, including a lake called Ann that anchors a small campground and picnic area on the forest's western side. Around such water, the plant life shifts completely, from drought-loving dune specialists to reeds, alders, and the feathery tamarack that likes wet feet. In spring, these wet pockets ring with frogs, and dragonflies patrol the open water all summer. A single afternoon here can carry you from desert dry dune to marsh in the space of a few hundred steps. Now the trail tilts gently upward, and the footing grows a touch firmer as we climb. We are moving toward the eastern edge of this country, where the sand plain meets a modest but locally famous height. In a land as flat as this, It does not take much elevation to earn a name and a view. Ahead lies the rise that people here have long called Blue Hill. Blue Hill is the high point of the neighboring Sherburne National Wildlife Refuge, standing roughly 90 feet above the plain around it. That may sound small, but on this table-flat landscape, it is enough to lift you above the treetops and open a long, rolling view across forest, marsh, and dune. A trail system loops around and over the hill, and it is a favorite goal for walkers looking out over the wide refuge below. From its slopes you can take in the same country we have been crossing, the pines, the openings, and the shine of scattered water, all at once. Sand Dune State Forest does not stand alone. Right beside it lies the Sherburne National Wildlife Refuge, more than 30,000 acres set aside in 1965 for wildlife and wild land. The St. Francis River winds through it, feeding a great sweep of restored marshes, wet meadows, and Oak Savanna. Where the state forest was built to hold the sand with trees, the refuge was created to bring back the wetlands and grasslands that draining and plowing had erased. Side by side, the two protect one of the largest blocks of wild country left in this fast-growing corner of Minnesota. As the trail skirts a marshy edge, it is worth pausing to think about the sheer abundance this restored country now supports. The refuge next door has recorded well over 200 kinds of birds, along with dozens of mammals and a long list of reptiles and amphibians. Water and grass and scattered trees, side by side, make room for an enormous variety of life. What looks at first like empty back country is in fact crowded, layer upon layer, with things that fly, swim, and creep. Among the most stirring of those returning residents are the sandhill cranes. These are tall, ancient-looking birds, standing nearly waist-high, gray-bodied with a bright red crown and a rolling, bugling call that carries for a mile. Not long ago, they had all but vanished from this part of the state, driven out as the wetlands were drained. With the marshes restored, they have come back to nest and feed in the open country here, and their calls now roll across these fields in spring and fall. To hear that wild trumpeting over ground once given up as wasteland is to hear a landscape healing. Keeping this patchwork alive takes constant, careful work. The open savanna and prairie survive only where people step in to do what natural wildfire once did on its own. That means deliberately setting cool, controlled fires in spring, and cutting back the brush and young trees that would otherwise swallow the openings. It can look drastic, a blackened field or a cleared slope, but it is exactly what these sun-loving plants and animals need. Restoration here is not a single act, but a promise renewed season after season. That work has not been without argument, because sand dunes is both a planted pine forest and a rare remnant savanna. People do not always agree on what it should become. Plans to remove some pines and burn back others in order to bring back the open dunes have drawn both strong support and firm resistance. It is a genuinely hard question, whether to honor the forest that hands so carefully planted, or the wilder, older savanna that came before? There is no simple answer, and the debate itself is part of what makes this ground so interesting to walk. We came looking for a curiosity, sand dunes in the land of lakes, and we found something richer, a place where ice, wind, drought, and human hands have all left their mark on the same few thousand acres. The planted pines, the drifting dunes, the vanished butterfly, and the returning cranes are all part of one long story about losing a landscape and choosing to rebuild it. Whatever this forest becomes next, it will remain a testament to the idea that damaged land can be brought back if people care enough to try. Thank you for watching. Follow for more of the trails of the world.